All right, so ladies and gentlemen, uh, uh, the movie that we are gonna review last week was Lincoln. The movie, about the 16th president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Um, it goes into kind of. It doesn't talk about. The movie isn't about the Civil War per se. There aren't any like big battle scenes, but it's more about the lead into like what is it, the Reconstruction era,
Yeah, it's kind of
and
you see a lot of the behind the scenes of what's going on in Washington and kind of trying to deal with the war and like all that is being fought within the within Congress and
mhm,
Senate and all that.
mhm. Right, and so it's President Lincoln is trying his best to get the 13th Amendment ratified to end slavery for all time within the United States. And he's faced with many challenges. An opposition party within the Democrats, and some some within his own party because of what's that word I'm looking for? Pragmatic reasons.
Right, right.
And so I think this movie does a really good job in uh, kind of revealing the kind of uh, character that Abraham Lincoln has, and that he sees because he sees this problem of slavery, and the Emancipation Proclamation, that was like a band-aid, and it was really more of a wartime provision,
Right.
and more of what's like more of a symbolic gesture, saying if you escape the South, then you will be granted freedom in the North. But it was a wartime provision, and after the war, what was going to happen then? I think uh, that's the big thing. That's the big issue at the heart of this movie.
Right. Because there's a lot that I did not like about the movie, but I would say that Daniel Day-Lewis stole the show for one. I thought his portrayal of Lincoln was just phenomenal. And
Yeah, really.
reading the background of what he did to prepare for that role, I had to give a lot of respect because he did his research and he really worked hard to get the role right, I think. And you could really feel not only the turmoil that he, because there was really no win scenario for Lincoln at that time. Uh, there's no one really liked Lincoln all that much. Not unlike today's time almost, where there's a lot of division within the country. Not that we're having states secede or anything like that, but it's a very divided country right now. But like back then, there's not a lot of people that thought much of Lincoln. They hated some of the things that he was doing, and really wherever he looked, I mean, it was like people were gonna die, regardless of no matter what choices he made. And so it was just more like, well, what's the quickest way to get it over with, get this war done, get these get this legislation through and begin the healing process. And you feel that turmoil. You also feel just kind of the sadness and depression that he felt because at that time one of his sons had died, and so that weighed very heavily on him. And so he's trying to care for his wife and himself, and it's just you feel the pressure. Daniel Day-Lewis really presents that pressure that Lincoln felt throughout the film. So that, in that sense, it was, I think, really that part was awesome. And obviously it doesn't tell the whole, because we always think of the Civil War and slavery and kind of the abolishment of slavery are always kind of connected, and that's true. That was definitely a part of the reason why there was a war, though that didn't come into being until later in the war. Whereas there was a lot of other factors involved, and I'm not in I'm not one of those people who's like, no, Civil War wasn't fought because slavery and kind of the those type of people. I'm just saying that it's a much more complicated and messy time, that we don't that there was a lot of other things involved that people don't really read about or think about when it comes to the Civil War.
Right. I think the issue of slavery as being the reason for the Civil War was more of like a superficial kind of reason. It was like that's the candy coating around like the actual real reason, when the real reason was just like to try to keep the country together.
Right, and see that initially, that's why from what people don't realize is that wasn't the initial reason for. I mean, slavery did play a part in it. Like because back in those days, there wasn't this giant bureaucracy federal government that was there. It was the states kind of were countries of their own, and yeah, there was this kind of like overarching federal government, but it wasn't what it is today.
Right.
And so when this idea, and as the country was starting to move forward and expand west, the question became is because there were states that had no slavery, and there were states that did, and the concern was that, like, do we want to continue that practice in these new states or not? And that was where a lot of the big divide was, and they felt that the South, the southern states felt that it was like the federal government was overstepping its bounds, which at that time it technically was, because that's not how things had worked up to that point. The states had been allowed to choose for themselves how they would govern themselves underneath the federal government. So that was one of the main issues. There were some economic factors, there were some other things involved, but that was a lot of them felt that the federal government was overstepping its bounds. And so when kind of that final straw that broke the camel's back ended and states started to leave, and Lincoln was trying desperately to keep everyone together, but couldn't. And so the South initially, they had better generals at the start of the war, and they had much better reasons, to fight for, they had much more reason to fight,
Right.
they felt like their way of life was being destroyed.
Right, because it was the arguments of states' rights versus sovereignty of the federal government, and the issue when the issue of slavery did come up, it was like, well, what about states' rights? Aren't as I thought we as as a state can decide what rules that we are the localities will be responsible for, as opposed to having the federal government come in and tell you what you can or cannot do within your state.
Right. And so the other thing involved too is, we kind of think of a lot of it's like, oh, everyone from the South, they're just racist bigots, and like, yeah, there was obviously like people like that down there, but you look at but there was a lot of people that were in the South that were not they weren't slaveholders. They were actually, in a sense, they didn't like slavery, but they fought for the South. I can't remember if it was, I think it was Stonewall Jackson. He wasn't a like pro-slavery, but he didn't want to fight against what he just thought were his countrymen, which was
neither was Robert E. Lee.
Right.
Robert E. Lee wasn't in favor for slavery, and but he was loyal to his home state of Virginia. And
Yeah.
and Virginia was pulling out of the Union, so he's like, oh well, as much as I'm an American, I have to I have to protect my home, and I think Lincoln even asked him to lead the army, the Union Army, but he turned it down. Not because
Right.
he was some racist racist slave perpetuator of slavery, but he's just like, well, no, well, I'm sorry, but I got to defend my my home state.
Right, what it's an unpopular opinion, but both those guys were actually very good men. It was just they kind of get vilified because they fought for the Confederacy
Right.
instead of the United States. And
Mm-hmm.
so for a lot of the early parts of the war, the Union was getting their ass handed to them because they had really shitty generals,
Right.
and it wasn't until Lincoln got a drunkard named Ulysses S. Grant
Right.
to
Yeah.
to finally kind of match wits with Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, and they kind of rallied around late in the war around this idea of the freeing slaves, and it gave people a purpose to fight, and it was also a realization that we have them outnumbered. We have all this all this other stuff. It's going to be bloody, and we're just at every stop we are going to pound them into the ground. And if they're they have, I think they were outnumbered, like the Union outnumbered them maybe like 3-1 or something like that. It's like if we lose 2 guys to every one of theirs, we're gonna win this war. It's gonna be bloody. It's gonna be nasty, but it's gonna be the quickest way to end the war. And I think once they had Grant in command of the army, that was kind of how the war was won.
Right. Yeah, I think
So that's
yeah,
kind
but I
of
think we're like we're getting too much into the history and not about the movie. So
okay. So anyways, one thing I wanted to say too about the movie was I felt it did show that not everyone in the Union was pro abolition, and there was a lot of people who were kind of against voting for the 13th Amendment.
13th Amendment.
Yeah.
Um,
There was a lot of people that were not for it, but they were in the Union. So we kind of do this kind of the Union was good and the South was bad, but there was people like that on both sides. There was people that it was a very complicated issue at the time.
Right. Because I think the best illustration of that was that meeting that Lincoln took. I forget who it was, but there was some sort of dispute, and they came to see the president uh, for him to kind of step in or pull some strings to help resolve the issue. And so he asked whether or not they be for ratifying the 13th Amendment if it meant ending the war tomorrow, and then they said yes, and then I think I believe it was the Secretary of State who then asked them, say, well, if we could end the war tomorrow but without ratifying this the 13th Amendment, would you be in favor? And they said yes, also, but then they also kind of slip in a racial epithet, which kind of proved which kind of made the point to the president. It's like, oh, not everyone is doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it more as a pragmatic means of just ending the war, which has been going on for I think 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and I think they captured that part well, because I think that's something that people need to see, that it wasn't we kind of look at it as that monolith, North good, South bad,
right?
And that wasn't the case.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think they portrayed that well. Daniel Day-Lewis to me stole the show. The rest of the movie felt very. The rest of the movie felt very hokey to me though. There was a lot of these weird longing glances and kind of the cheesy 80s film where they're all clapping for
yeah, I mean in respect to Daniel Day-Lewis, he was offered this part like 3 times, and then he turned it down 3 times. And it wasn't until
Yeah.
like he himself did the research about Lincoln that he finally like they came back to him like one more time, and then he finally agreed to do the movie because he felt like he didn't. Because Daniel Day-Lewis said himself that he didn't think that he would do a good job of portraying the president. Um, but after he began his own research about it, he then felt confident enough that he'd be able to portray the president and do it justice.
Right. Yeah, and I think he did a whale of a job on that playing Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because he even he read through all his correspondence. He read all the correspondence that was written to Lincoln. He people that were that had kind of were talking about Lincoln. He even kind of. I mean, we don't obviously have any audio of what Lincoln sound like, but he's
But there was a lot of
Kentucky, and
but,
he studied that Kentuckian dialect from that time, and kind of was able to kind of facsimile what Lincoln may have sounded like.
Right, but there was also very detailed description of how he sounded and all this other stuff.
Exactly, he went through that, and I think he did a great job with it.
But I think, but also I think the majority of the cast they had, did a pretty, good job as well. I think Tommy Lee Jones as Senator Thaddeus Stevens, it's kind of it's kind of funny because it's kind of hard to know. At least in Tommy Lee Jones' case, how much of it is he trying to bring of the actual person or the character versus how much of it is himself.
Right. Yeah.
But I think it's weird because I think he gets cast as he gets cast as characters that I think might be fitting for his actual personality.
Right.
And so,
and I think that was the difference for me too, is where I felt where it wasn't. Obviously, it was a star-studded cast. There was a lot of big stars in there, but for some of them, I felt like it wasn't. Not that they phoned it in per se, but just the Daniel Day-Lewis just to me stole that. You could tell he worked much harder at it than some of the others did.
I mean, yeah, exactly.
Not that Tommy Lee Jones did a bad job. Not that what's his face as Robert Todd Lincoln did a bad job.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt, yeah, but
yeah, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Yeah. Thank you. Not that Sally Fields did a bad job, but it was. I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's safe to say that Daniel Day-Lewis embodied Abraham Lincoln.
He overshadowed everybody.
Yeah. Exactly. All right.
So I would say I'm gonna give it a 2.5 to 3-star review, just because you'll see what I'm talking about when you watch it. There is a lot of just some of the hokiness it's too much for me, but I loved, like I said, it captured the complications that the war had, how the North felt about everything going on, about the 13th Amendment, and they captured the struggle and the pressure that Abraham Lincoln was under during the war. And I think that was that to me is what gives it that kind of I would say lean to 3-star in that case. But yeah, I'm gonna go 2.5 to 3 stars on this one.
All right. Okay, then I'd give it 3 stars. It's a good movie. It's if you want to see Daniel Day-Lewis at his absolute best, then watch this movie.
Oh yeah, he's fantastic.
Yeah, because similarly to you, there were a lot of hokey kind of saccharine kind of moments, especially during the vote, and
That was the part that like I would just it kind of pissed me off a little bit.
Yeah, and there's like that, there's like that one senator, like, who said he wasn't gonna, vote yes on it, but then like in the midst of the vote, he like, he switches sides and he triumphantly says like he's like yes, and like, all of his like Democratic colleagues are like booing him or like throwing papers at him, and it's like traitor and stuff like that. But,
yeah, exactly. That was like I'm gonna say that probably didn't happen like that, but well, who knows?
Yeah, and then there's like that one senator who was like morally conflicted, and like because he was a Democrat, I believe he's a Democrat. And he's like, and then he kind of like whispers, like he's like yes, and then like what? And then he like gets up, he's like, I said yes, and it's like oh come on.
Well, part of me also kind of thought of was it Dinesh D'Souza's documentary through that, where it's like it wasn't like every Democrat that voted no on that, but only Democrats voted no.
Right. Yeah.
And that is on the record too. That wasn't just like some
it's completely. It's you can totally look it up. At the records of Congress, you could you can totally look it up and you could verify. Not all Democrats voted no, but Democrats did vote no.
Yeah. But yeah, it's that the last scene, the vote scene, was kind of where that's where it lost a lot of the stars for me. I was just like that whole scene just kind of, it's like, you got to be kidding me. This is ridiculous. It felt like one of those like really like cheesy 80s films.
Yeah.
Like,
it was very. It was almost like Dead Poet Society at the at the end, where they like Captain, my Captain. They stand up on top of their desks.
Exactly. That was the movie I was thinking about. I couldn't remember the name, but yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I mean, even though like the part of me still loves that scene from that movie, and like it still gives me like the feels.
In that movie.
In that movie, yes. All right. So that's our review of Lincoln. 2.5 to 3 for Robert. 3 stars for me. Go watch it. Go watch it. If you want, come back and leave us a comment letting us know how you felt.
And tell me how racist I am for all my thoughts on the Civil War.